Mark, can you hear me? Are you there, Mark?
Yeah.
So I just did a very brief description of some of the attributes of Prop 47. I don't know if you heard.
No, I didn't.
Well, since you're very familiar with Prop 47 itself, tell us very briefly what's wrong with reducing certain crimes from felonies to misdemeanors.
Well, it's the crimes. It's the crimes that they've chosen in this initiative to reduce from felonies to misdemeanors. The most prominent effect of this measure is to reduce basically all drug offenses from felonies to misdemeanors, and this includes cocaine, which is currently a felony, to possess to a misdemeanor, possession of heroin from a felony to a misdemeanor, and possession of methamphetamine from a felony. Possession of methamphetamine can now be charged as a misdemeanor and a felony. This would make it so that it would always have to be filed as a misdemeanor. So that's the biggest effect that this measure has. And these are dangerous drugs. I mean, people that possess cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine usually aren't going to work every day. They're getting money by breaking into people's homes and stealing their phones or purses on the street, stealing their credit cards to pay for their drug habit. So these crimes do have consequences, and they're dangerous drugs.
Okay, so we can talk about them being reduced, but let's now say something about what the difference is between being sentenced on a felony conviction and being sentenced on a misdemeanor. What's the difference in the sentencing?
Yes, a felony you can receive up to 3 years in prison. Now, the definition of, quote, prisons changed over the last 3 years, but let's just refer to it as prison now for simplistic purposes. You can receive a 3-year sentence for a felony conviction. You can only receive a 1-year sentence for a misdemeanor conviction, and that's a maximum, and that would have to be served in county jail, not in state prison.
All right, so Raj, we've heard Mark some of his criticisms in terms of Prop 47. Why are you for it?
Well, I think it's about having a long-term view of what's best for California. Unfortunately, our charging practices, our approach towards problem solving and ultimately incarceration has been short-sighted, and California as a state has been paying the price for that for the past couple decades. And I want to make it clear, this is bigger than really just a criminal justice issues. This is about the fate of the state, the fate of the future of young people in California. The direction of trying to increase incarceration to support what some have called lock-em-up politics has resulted in prison overcrowding to the extent that the Supreme Court even had to step in and declare our prison system so overcrowded that it was constitutionally in violation of cruel and unusual punishment. What that has also meant is our investments into prisons have hampered our ability to put public resources into things that we know are good for California, which are schools, which are treatment programs, giving not just our families, but our young people as well an opportunity to be contributing members of society. That's why DEs are also behind it, as well as a lot of policy setting decision makers across the country.
Sure. Did you hear him, Mark?
Yes.
Okay, and so he said it's not just about the laws right now as we know them, it's about the future of California. So what would you say to that?
Well, that sounds like a real grand statement, but let's get to the facts. That the population has already been decreased. The governor has released many prisoners already, so they are in the process of complying with the court order to reduce the overcrowding. And let's talk about the proponents of this measure. In their arguments, claim, okay, the prisons are filled with low-level drug offenders, so we need to reduce these crimes to misdemeanors to prevent these people from going to prison because the prisons are overcrowded. Well, the facts are that these individuals don't go to prison now. Somebody who's convicted of possession of cocaine, possession of heroin, the 2011 Realignment Act passed by the legislature does not allow us to sentence those people to state prison now. They go to county jail. So they don't go to state prison anymore anyway. So this argument that somehow this is going to decrease the prison population is a false argument.
Okay.
They aren't sent to prison now.
All right, we can certainly get back to that. Stacy, you've heard both sides. What do you think in terms of Prop 47, some of what Mark has said, some of what Raj has said?
I think that drugs are dangerous, and they're not only causing people to make choices that they wouldn't naturally make if they weren't in fact under the influence, but they're breaking up families. They're taking family members from their families and to put them in prison or jail. I think that someone can learn a lesson doing a 1-year sentence versus doing a 3-year sentence in prison. I don't think you have to go to prison in order to learn the mistakes that you've made at all. I don't think that prison does that for people. I think that it's in the individual, and when they get the help that they need and they get the education that they need on their disease, if they're using these drugs or selling these drugs, it's all part of the disease of addiction. And I think if they get the right information, they can get that anywhere, but prison is actually not giving out that information anymore. So there's more programs in county jail than there actually is in prison. So I think doing a year in the county jail would be more better than doing 3 years in prison without any type of drug programs, because all those programs have been cut. And I think that I just think that the danger is in the fact that a lot of the people using these drugs don't have the information that they need to get off of them or to get the help they need. So serving time on something that you've done you should be getting the information that you need so that you don't repeat the behavior, and none of that's going on anyway.
Sure. Now, Mark, many have criticized the justice system by pointing out the disparities in sentencing that go on anyway. So, and they point to evidence that seems to indicate that if you're black and brown, the sentence is harsher than if you're of the majority race. So what would you say in terms of the disparities in terms of sentencing?
Well, lots of different things. Number one is, unfortunately, these issues are complicated, and it's so rare that people look at the actual statistics. I would imagine if you were to ask my opponents or the proponents of 47 right now, if you ask them, what's the percentage of prisoners that are in prison, for example, for low-level drug offenses or simple drug possession, I pretty much guarantee you they can't give you that answer. But I can, because it's a public record. All of us can. The prison, there's 134,000 prisoners in the state of California, in state prison. Do you know what percentage are in there for simple possession? What's the percentage? It's 3%. 3% of all the prisoners in state prison are there for simple drug possession. So that's 4,300 prisoners out of 134,000. So one of the things that troubles me about this proponent is the proponents keep claiming that this is going to save all these prison costs, and that's just not true, because the prisons they currently aren't filled with low-level drug offenders. That's number one. Number two, I believe in treatment as much as everybody else. I know it costs $50,000 to $60,000 to house somebody in prison. So ideally, if we can prevent them from being in prison, that's great. I agree with that. That's why over a decade ago, Prop 36 was passed, which says if you're charged with a simple drug possession like cocaine and heroin, you're entitled to go to drug treatment and get your charge dismissed. That's what occurs now. We don't have people getting arrested for the very first time going to state prison for 3 years. They get drug treatment. And then when they fail that drug treatment, maybe 2-3 times later, and have 2 or 3 other felony convictions, then they go to state prison. So these people that are even housed in state prison for simple drug possession are repeat offenders for many other crimes. So, and I believe in treatment, but there's people that choose not to receive treatment. It's their choice. Sometimes we think they're walking around like robots and they can't decide what they're going to do, but they seem to be able to decide who their victims are. They decide whether they're going to get a fix that day. And I'm not saying every one of them has control, but these are repeat offenders who've been offered treatment many, many times before, and they've chosen not to continue. And so those are the ones that we need the ability to incarcerate so they don't commit other types of crimes.
Okay, Mark, let's hear what Raj has to say.
Sure, and I think it's interesting, Henrietta, that Mark dodged your question around racial inequality in our criminal justice system. And Mark, let me finish. And he had actually mentioned this issue of facts. And so let's talk about the facts. The prison system in the state of California has a recidivism rate of over 60%. So if you're looking at this logically and rationally, and your end goal is to reduce criminality and people in California being victims of crime, clearly sending people to prison has not statistically proven as an effective measure. If anything, you're almost increasing the likelihood of criminality by sending people to prison. So that is the facts. And there's another issue beyond simply the overcrowding in prisons. And Mark has maybe given a false impression of where we are with prison overcrowding right now to say that realignment, which was forced upon the state of California and is now being legislatively mandated, has somehow made it so our prisons are not overcrowded, is completely 100% inaccurate, is the reason where we are still trying to find ways to shred the numbers down in prisons. But there's two other major parts of Proposition 47 that he's not talking about. One is charges that would have been felonies would become misdemeanors despite the length of the sentence and where someone is housed during the incarceration. To have a felony on a record becomes a life sentence that has huge implications on a person's ability to find employment, to find housing, to get social services, even to get student loans. And if our end goal, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, is to reduce crime, what we want is people who had only the option of crime or saw that as the only option to exist, we want them included and embraced in the traditional accepted economy. The only way we could do that is if we remove the barriers. Having a felony on the record is a modern-day scarlet letter that is forcing people out of the traditional economy so they could contribute. And a rational person, I think, will see it. There's a key question to the voters in the November election. It's not a question of do you necessarily only believe in equal treatment. I believe California is a pretty forward-thinking state and would agree with equal treatment. It's not only on your position on particular charges or the mechanics of the court. The question is, do we think that it is sound, rational policy to try to find ways to reach the end goal of reducing criminality and also invest in programs like education, like treatment? That is a pretty rational conclusion that a lot of Californians are making, including some people in law enforcement.
Okay, Mark, you heard it. Before we get to you, Stacy.
I'd like to ask one question. That is, if either of my other individuals on this phone call can tell me the racial makeup of the California state prison system as of 2013. Can either of them tell me what the racial makeup is?
I could absolutely tell you that is racially disproportionate. There's an overrepresentation of blacks and Latinos compared to their general demographic in the state population.
So the answer is no. He can't tell us the racial makeup, and I can. So in 2000.
Well, yeah. Look, I mean, I could go on my phone and go on Google. But so, are you saying, Mark? Are you saying, Mark, that our criminal justice system is not racially sound?
Question. In 2013, as of this last year, 41% were Hispanic, 23% were black, and 30% were white. 25 years ago, 28% were Hispanic, and 35% were black, and 32% were white. So if you want to just use statistics, I guess you could make an argument that over the last 25 years, if we were racially biased in our criminal justice system 25 years ago, which many would suggest, we were racially biased primarily towards black individuals, and now in 2013 we're more racially biased towards Hispanics because the percentage of the population is higher in Hispanics, and that's false logic, and that's inaccurate logic. No, I get to finish. You don't get to interrupt. I don't think.
Okay, I'll go after you, Mark.
Recidivism. Now let's talk about recidivism. It's 60% definition. They call people who recidivate, if they get a dirty drug test, they say that's recidivism. I don't know that I even agree with that definition. So this alleged failure of the prisons, isn't quite as dire as they claim it is. I wish it was better. I wish it was higher. I wish less of them would go back to prison. But it isn't necessarily that 6 out of 10 are always back in custody. Now, they might have a dirty test. They might not report to their probation officer. So you need to define the terms. Finally, who is in prison? In our current state prison system, 70%, 7 out of 10 of everybody in prison has committed a crime against another person, like murder, rape, robbery. Another 26% are repeat offenders who committed a violent or sex type offense. 14%, I believe it is, who have committed a property crime. That's where they've stolen your car or broken into your house. So these are
So
the
are you
people, frankly,
talking,
that should be in prison.
Mark, are you talking statewide? Are you
Yes,
talking Contra
yes.
Costa County?
No, statewide. This is the statistics from the state, that 70% are there for crimes like murder, rape, and robbery. And I think we all agree that these guys ought to be in prison for that, I think. Maybe even my opponents disagree on that, but that's a separate issue. Now, felonies, I believe in rehabilitation. So if this problem, this alleged huge problem that these felons can't get jobs, change the law so they can get those felonies to reduce or off their record. That's a way to handle that problem. You don't need to change the punishment. And finally, one of the reasons I oppose reducing these from felonies to misdemeanors is I believe in treatment too. We just disagree on how that should occur. My opponents say treatment should occur by reducing them to misdemeanors. I say that people will not go into treatment if your only hammer over their head is a misdemeanor. They'll go, well, I'll take 10 days in jail. I don't want to do a treatment program.
Okay, now
The
before
defendants do not want treatment because it's hard work.
before
It's
we
therapy.
forget all of the
Point.
points that you're making, let's let Raj respond. You want to respond to anything that he said?
Yeah, I mean, I could respond very quickly. Now, I want to hear from Stacy, because if anyone has the authority to talk about what it's like inside the prison system in terms of demographics or who's there, and then secondly, what it takes for someone to break the cycle of incarceration, it's a woman who's been there and also has allowed and other people coming out of prison to remain there. But very quickly, Mark is playing. He's playing with the numbers to sort of shoehorn into an argument, and kudos for him being inventive in his kind of argument construction. But he's saying two important things that I really hope viewers remember. He is saying that our prison system does not have racial disparities. If anyone in viewing this show believes that's true, then absolutely they should follow the road and drink whatever Mark's drinking. Secondly, if you want to look at racial disparities, you should look at what the population is in the general state population of a particular ethnic group versus their comparison and representation in the prison system. And if those numbers don't add up, and we know they don't, then you either have to create your own math and your own numbers, which I think is what happened here. I know he talked about racial disparities. I wanted to address that. And Stacey, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Well, I was going to ask you, Stacy, as someone who's been in and out of prison for 18 years, and Mark talks about recidivism, and he talks along with Raj about training and education and rehabilitation. What were you in and out of prison for?
I had some petty thefts on my record, mostly violent crimes. And I never received treatment for my petty theft or some of the domestic violence that I went through and suffered through. But the women that I work with, a lot of the women that I work with do have those charges. And if someone receives stolen property or writes a check, they're not going to offer them drug treatment. And most likely they were under the influence when they did it, I'm sure. But those type of charges, you don't get offered drug treatment. They don't even check to see if you're a drug addict. You just get sentenced and you go and you do your time. And until you figure out that you're a drug addict is when you finally can start taking the steps to get help for your problem. But certain charges don't get looked at as, oh, they might be a drug addict. They might be trying to protect their disease and keep their addiction going. That's why they stole that out of someone's car, or they don't do that.
So
type of research.
what was the case in your particular case? You had talked about petty theft.
Yes.
Did you? Okay.
So my first case as an adult was a petty theft, and it was under $900, and I did receive a felony for that charge. That charge is still currently on my record. So if Prop 47 passes, I will have the opportunity to get that dropped to a misdemeanor and hopefully get it expunged.
So you said it doesn't take a 3-year sentence. One could be sentenced for 1 year. When you were initially sentenced, what was your sentence for?
My first sentence was about 6 months in the Alameda County Jail, and it was horrible and scary. But I didn't get it then. I didn't get it. I never stole again. I never received a petty theft charge ever again after that. But I had a drug problem, so I was on drugs. So my cycle continued ongoing, and I did many different things that I never would have done if I had not had that disease of addiction. And every time I ever committed any crime, I was under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
So when were you finally treated? One assumes it was the treatment that kept you from repeating the crimes, the type of crimes you were committing.
Yeah, I received treatment in 2005 was the first treatment that I ever received. And that was not because of my charge. I had an assault with a deadly weapon charge. And I did not get offered treatment, but because I got a local disposition, I did a 1-year sentence in the county jail. I was offered programs after being sentenced, which offered me treatment. And I just kind of stumbled upon it. And then I was able to determine that I think I have a problem. One, because I didn't do that crime sober. I was highly intoxicated and under the influence of methamphetamines. But being sentenced to that, I felt like I deserved the worst punishment ever. I felt like a horrible person. I didn't know that I had a problem, and that problem pushed me into doing some things that I probably wouldn't have done if I wasn't under the influence of the drugs. So I got to discover that in treatment in county jail. Through the RCP program in this county, Santa Clara County. And without that program, I would have never known that I had a drug problem.
So Mark, are you saying that there are treatment programs in state prison as well?
There are, unfortunately, I go to prisons on lifer hearings, and they've cut back a lot on the programs, and I think that is a mistake, and there's been a mistake in the Department of Corrections for a long time. However, a lot of people, the vast majority, well, I don't know if I'll say vast majority, but many people don't go to prison anymore because of realignment. They go to county jail, and there's lots of programs either in county jail and where you're released from county jail. Nobody in the state of California who's now charged with simple drug possession goes to prison. We can't do it. It's not the law. They can only go there if they've got a prior record of certain convictions or they have a gun or some other charge involved with their drug charge. If they just have a drug charge, they go to county jail currently. Because we have that felony that we can charge them with, I believe that has an influence in forcing them into treatment. Because if somebody has an option, I can either take a felony and go into custody for 3 years, or I can go to treatment. We think they more likely go to treatment. I think my opponents and I agree that treatment is important. We disagree on how to best accomplish that. They believe reduce it to misdemeanor and that will make it better. I'm saying they're going to county jail anyway. Give us the ability to have a hammer over the person's head by charging them with felony. That will motivate them to get the treatment they need, because as the last caller
Sure.
talked about,
Stacy,
she wasn't motivated to get treatment. I'm trying to help her get treatment. This is a way to help her get treatment.
Mark, Stacy would like to say something.
I think that, like, as Raj said, we're thinking about the future. And if the people that are continuing to go to prison obviously have a record, if they do pick up that felony, it's double sentence for them no matter what realignment is happening, they're going to go to prison. So I think that this would protect the people that are creating the recidivism. And for those coming along behind them that have never had a case, well, they get kudos because they're going to get the misdemeanor versus the felony, and they're at the beginning of their criminal history or wherever they're at in that spectrum. But I think that the people that are causing recidivism, this will help them.